Welcome back to Doctor Who The Cancelled Chronicles. Today we will be taking a look at the Ninth Doctor's next two seasons, Season 34 and Season 35. Before we start, I did want to address a mistake I made earlier on. So the BBC would not implement a 16:9 format until 1998. So for the first 3 years of the Paul McGann era, it would still be in 4:3 format rather than the 16:9 format, while Season 35 and on, the 16:9 format would be implemented. With that, let's move on. In preparation for the Ninth Doctor's next season, Lewis Marks had a request that another companion be written into the show. He didn't like how, for the most part since the 70s, the Doctor had only one female companion. He felt that the idea was a bit too archaic, so he assigned script editor Kate Orman to write in another companion to whoever wrote the first story of the season. This in turn made Alan Barnes responsible for the task. Fortunately, during his story, he had a one-time companion that he simply made an ongoing companion. Outside of this, there was little change in the overall show. However, the BBC would announce that due to the newfound popularity of Doctor Who again, and ratings reaching the highest it's been in years, that next year, in 1998, Doctor Who would be getting 2 official spin-offs to celebrate the show's 35th anniversary. One would be an ongoing series, and the other would be a mini-series. While the shows in question would be announced in-universe as part of this announcement, I'm keeping them secret for dramatic tension. The first story this season is Storm Warning, written by Alan Barnes. October 1930. His Majesty's airship, the R-101, sets off on her maiden voyage to the farthest flung reaches of the British Empire, carrying the brightest lights of the Imperial fleet, carrying the hopes and dreams of a breathless nation. Not to mention a ruthless spy with a top-secret mission, a mysterious passenger who appears nowhere on the crew list, a would-be adventuress destined for the Singapore Hilton, an archaeologist far beyond her era, and a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey. There's a storm coming. There's something unspeakable, something with wings crawling across the stern. Thousands of feet high in the blackening sky, the crew of the R-101 brace themselves. When the storm breaks, their lives won't be all that's at stake. The future of the galaxy will be hanging by a thread. This is, technically, our first proper Big Finish adaptation, and it's the story to introduce Charlie Pollard, who would still be played by India Fisher in this universe. Even though she doesn't really act outside of her voice work that much, I still think she could have worked, and I couldn't imagine anyone else in the role. It would still follow the main story for the most part, however, you would have to address Bernice, as she is still a companion. The story would have been well liked by fans. Many loved the new companion Charlie and felt the story was interesting and creative, as well as a really good villain. Many also felt the tone of the story perfectly fit for the personality of the Ninth Doctor. However, some felt that Bernice was a little bit too sidelined in the story. The second story is Sword of Orion, written by Nicholas Briggs. The human race is locked in deadly combat with the android hordes in the Orion system. Light years from the front line, the Doctor, Bernice, and Charlie arrive to sample the dubious delights of a galactic backwater, little suspecting that the consequences of the Orion War might reach them there. But High Command's lust for victory knows no bounds. Trapped aboard a mysterious derelict star destroyer, the Doctor, Bernice, and Charlie find themselves facing summary execution. But this is only the beginning of their troubles. The real danger has yet to awaken, until somewhere in the dark recesses of the Garazone system, the Cybermen receive the signal for reactivation. Again, it would pretty much adapt the story, however some things would be cut for time, obviously. The story would have been decently liked by fans. While many loved seeing the Cybermen again and at points felt like a Troughton Cybermen story, others felt that the story was way too dull and wasn't incredibly memorable or interesting. The third story is The Time Storm, written by Andy Lane. While trying to escape a nefarious foe, the TARDIS enters a time storm, and everything goes white. Charlie wakes up in bed. Singapore, 1930. Was she just dreaming about the enchanting man she met on the R-101? As well as the charming yet gritty archaeologist he was friendly with, or has something messed with her mind beyond comprehension? So this would essentially be a what is reality sort of episode. Kinda sorta like Amy's Choice, but with more mindfuckery, I guess. More so playing with time and possibly different realities. It would involve Charlie being in Singapore, like the R-101 didn't crash and all that. But she would notice small cracks in reality, and I'm not talking about like literal cracks, like the crack in time, but like small pockets of different realities being within her main reality. Kinda like Doctor Strange, but on a Doctor Who budget, and not in the same sort of cracks and mirrors sort of way. And it would be Charlie observing this as someone who didn't know the Doctor. Again, a good comparison would be Donna Noble in Turn Left, but her mind wouldn't be totally wiped. There would be small twinges here and there of memories of the Doctor and Bernice. The first episode would mainly be her trying to figure all this out, while the second episode would be the Doctor and Bernice trying to reach her. It's revealed that this unexplained phenomenon that the Doctor dubs a time storm hit all of them, and they were in their own realities. But in regards to the Doctor and Bernice, the Doctor got out first because he's a Time Lord, so of course he would, and Bernice got out soon after because of her strong mind, and she's been in the TARDIS longer. There would be an A-plot with Charlie's realities crumbling around her while the Doctor and Bernice tried to get through to her and wake her up. Eventually they managed to do so and get out of the alleged time storm through some quick fiddling with the controls. They all wonder where it came from, to which it leaves them all a bit uneasy. The story would have been praised, albeit could have done with another episode to flesh out its ideas. Many liked the Charlie-focused story and how being in the TARDIS has affected her thus far, as well as some hints at the concept of a wider Doctor Who universe, mainly in terms of this unexplained phenomenon. The fourth story is The Stones of Venice, written by Paul Mars. The Doctor, Bernice, and Charlie decide to take a well-deserved break from the monotony of being chased, shot at, and generally suffering antisocial behavior at the hands of others. And so they end up in Venice, well into Charlie's future, as the great city prepares to sink beneath the water for the last time, which would be a momentous, if rather dispiriting, event to witness in of itself. However, the machinations of a lovesick aristocrat, a proud art historian, and a rabid high priest of a really quite dodgy cult combine to make Venice's swan song a night to remember. And then there's the rebellion by the web-footed amphibious underclass, the mystery of a disappearing corpse, and the truth behind a curse going back further than curses usually do. The Doctor, Bernice, and Charlie are forced to wonder just what they have got themselves involved with this time. It would again adapt the story properly, with some things being cut for time. The story was decently well liked, as some felt the tone, setting, atmosphere, and side characters were exceptional, but it majorly lacked in story and could have been a lot better. The fifth story is Minuet in Hell, written by Alan W. Lear. The 21st century has just begun, and Malebolgia is enjoying its status as the newest state in America. After his successful involvement with Scotland's devolution, Brigadier Alastair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart has been invited to Malebolgia to offer some of his experiences and expertise. There he encounters the charismatic Brigham Elisha Dashwood III, an evangelical statesman running for governor who may not be quite as clean-cut and wholesome as he makes out. One of Dashwood's other roles in society is as patron of a new medical institute concentrating on curing the ills of the human mind. One of the patients there interests the Brigadier, someone who claims he travels through space and time in something called a TARDIS. Charlie, however, has more than a few problems of her own. Amnesiac, she is working as a hostess at the local chapter of the Hellfire Club, populated by local dignitaries who have summoned forth the demon Marcosius. And the leader of the club, none other than Dashwood, who seems determined to achieve congressional power by the most malevolent means at his disposal, and Bernice is nowhere to be found. It would once again adapt the story with making the necessary tweaks and cutting for time. The story would have been considered the weakest of the season. While many fans loved seeing the Brigadier again and having him interact with the Ninth Doctor, many felt that pretty much the rest of the story was lacking in a lot of areas, with many stating that the southern accents were terrible and that the story was weak and too overstuffed. The sixth story is Partners in Crime, written by Russell T. Davies. The Doctor and Bernice must investigate adipose industries as there is a new diet pill about to hit the streets that promises to melt the fat away. They must interview various beta testers to see what lurks inside the corporation and see what the CEO is really up to. Last adaptation this season, I promise. This would essentially cut the episode we got in half, since we don't have to worry about reintroducing a companion into the mix. The in-universe reason is that this story was considered for introducing a companion, which eventually went to Storm Warning. Bernice would take the Donna role, while Charlie would stay in the TARDIS to observe anything else that's strange, although she would have almost no role in the overall episode. This story would have been well liked, even if a bit silly. While some said the effects for the adipose were really bad, most of the story had a lighthearted feel to it that many liked that it didn't matter in the long run, as well as people liking that Bernice got some time to shine, as many felt that Charlie was overshadowing her at points. The seventh story is Lair of the Sontarans, written by Mark Platt. Visiting Earth in the near future, the Doctor and company happen upon a lair beneath the Earth's surface where something has been awaiting for centuries. A creature beyond the planet's era. How did it come upon there? It seems like an old enemy of the Doctor might just have the answer. This story would essentially be a low-scale Eldritch story, as well as the return of the Sontarans. It would essentially be an intertwined mystery between Gallifrey's past, this being that's trapped in this lair or bunker deep within the Earth's mantle, and the Sontarans. The attempt of this story would be to make the Sontarans into a more serious villain, and taking advantage of something they came upon early in their ancestry, possibly before they even became Sontarans. The being in question is an Eldritch being called a Yeggoth, and the Sontarans figuring out why it was planted here for millennia. Eventually, the Sontarans do have it figured out. The Doctor and company try to interrogate them for information, but they don't reveal it. In the second episode, it's revealed that the Time Lords tried to spread their influence to other planets, starting with Earth, before they ultimately decided they didn't want to interfere in the higher universe, and it was forgotten. The Sontarans eventually release the being in the hopes to conquer Earth, but the Doctor and company stop it and destroy the lair. The story ends with the Doctor just confirming how terrible the Time Lords can be. This story would have been mostly criticized by fans. While there were plenty of good ideas, they didn't mesh at all and felt like they were thrown at the wall to see what would stick. It should have been either an Eldritch story, a Sontaran story, or a Gallifrey story. It shouldn't have been all three. However, some liked the idea of a more threatening Sontaran. The 8th story is Turning Point, written by Kate Orman. The Doctor has saved countless worlds, saved countless people, countless races. He is a good man, but even good men are pushed to do unreasonable things. This is the point that Bernice and Charlie just have to trust him. The turning point where the Doctor must sacrifice countless worlds for the entire universe. This would essentially be Invasion of Time, but done right. Kind of. Not really in the story, just the concept of the Doctor is evil story with some sort of twist. The entire story would be intentionally vague, as it is entirely from Bernice and Charlie's point of view, who were knocked out prior to the story's events. The first episode would take place entirely in the TARDIS, with Bernice and Charlie trying to figure out what happened, with the only info they can get from the Doctor is that he has to do it. The rest of the story would take place on Earth and involve UNIT, with Angela Bruce as Brigadier Bombera reprising her role, and it's because of this that the story takes place about a decade in the future. The Doctor explains that Earth is integral to saving the universe and that they need to trust him. The second episode would essentially be the Doctor involving UNIT in whatever scheme he's planning, and Bombera also being hesitant to believe him. It eventually blows up in his face when Charlie, Bernice, and Bombera all start yelling at him for answers at the end of the episode. This leads into the final 2 episodes where, in a secret room in the TARDIS, the Doctor tells them that there is some sort of unknown universe-spanning event that has gained sentience and that it will destroy the entire universe unless the Doctor can somehow sacrifice forgotten and abandoned worlds to save the rest of the universe. And then somehow, the Earth is at the center. All 3 are against this because the Doctor shouldn't hold that kind of power in his hands. The rest of the episode and the final episode would involve the Doctor hooking up an alien weapon that UNIT had hidden from the public to his TARDIS, and then a subplot with Charlie, Bernice, and Bombera trying to stop the Doctor from doing this. But in the final episode, the Doctor manages to destroy countless worlds and deemed it was necessary for the rest of the universe. A voice then enters the Doctor's head explaining that he is not a hero for what he has done. In fact, it doesn't make him any worse than him. Then the scenery falls away, only for the Doctor, Charlie, and Bernice to be in some sort of darkened room, and out from the shadows we see the Master. He starts chuckling to himself, with the TARDIS crew looking on in horror. The screen then fades to black and we see to be continued. The story would have been massively praised, mainly due to Paul McGann's performance as sort of an evil version of the Doctor, with the vague aspects of the story being an intriguing mystery, as well as Fisher and Bowerman getting a good amount of screen time together and their chemistry, along with Bruce. Many stated the weakest part was the story, and it felt a bit too long for 4 episodes, and a bit generic, even if somewhat intentional. Season 34 was a bit of a mixed bag. While there were some great stories like The Time Storm and Turning Point, many of the other stories range from mediocre to only good. While many liked Charlie as a companion and stated that she was one of the best, some felt she hampered Bernice's character many times. However, nothing would really change going from this season to the next, so off we go into season 35. For season 35, to sort of celebrate 35 years of Doctor Who, the season would be changed for the first time since season 30, and there would only be 6 stories this season. It was to create a more epic feel, as well as be more mindful of its budget, as well as having a sequel story to an earlier Doctor Who story, which would serve as a 35th anniversary special of sorts. Outside of that, everyone returns for season 35, and the change with the 16:9 ratio would happen this year instead of what I said before, but nothing else. The first story is Judgment Day, written by Kate Orman. Soon after the events of Turning Point, the Master reveals himself to be the one who pushed the Doctor to his evil deeds. They are now on the same level, as equal heathens. The Doctor no longer has the superiority of morale. It is now Judgment Day for the Doctor, and Charlie and Bernice must help him in any way possible, believing that the Doctor isn't responsible for what he has done. Following from the invasion of time but done right, this would essentially be Trial of a Time Lord but done right. It would sort of be a half and half story. One half would be a prequel to the events of Turning Point, although these would dissipate after episode 2, and the other would be continuing the story. The continuing story would be the Master accusing the Doctor of destroying countless worlds, that he is not as good as he says he is, especially with what has just happened. He would also mention various actions from his 7th incarnation due to the countless fucked up things he did as well. Bernice and Charlie try to fight for the Doctor with evidence of their adventures, as well as dipping into the moral gray area when it comes to certain aspects of the Doctor, in sort of a meta way, because of how the Doctor isn't a traditional hero, because he is willing to make those morally out there decisions, and how the story would kind of comment on that. The prequel story would instead be a typical adventure with the Doctor, Bernice, and Charlie, and they encounter the Master. It would be a battle of wits, with the Master setting a trap leading to the opening of Turning Point, where the Master implants false memories inside the Doctor's head, with him thinking that there is this being that will destroy the universe, and how he can't tell his companions, as well as knocking him out. This would lead to the final episode, where it's basically one giant trial, pretty much, or more along the lines of verbal sparring. The best way I can describe it is Measure of a Man, but less professional and not necessarily in an official court setting. It would eventually result in the Doctor springing a trap of his own and sending the Master to a far-off future on a distant planet without his TARDIS. The story ends with the Doctor knowing he tries his best to be good, and that's all they can hope for. The story would have received greater praise than its previous story. Many felt that McGann and Jacoby gave amazing performances in this story and worked well off each other, as well as the main story, the flashbacks, and the subplot all flowed together very well, as well as making what was essentially a simplistic courtroom drama very interesting. The second story is Heat of the Inferno, written by David A. McGinty. The Doctor returns to the parallel dimension he visited long ago, dealing with evil versions of his previous companions, and must team up with a good version of the Master to return to his own universe and possibly take down the evil that is hunting him. This would be considered the 35th anniversary special by the BBC in its promotional material, despite that not being the intention when originally written. So the story would have to allow for some retconning. The parallel Earth would have not been destroyed in Inferno, but a part of London where the story took place would have become uninhabitable. This would have been a companion light story, with mainly just focusing on the Doctor somehow getting trapped on the parallel Earth with some sort of bounty hunter named AXF5439, as well as the leader being a secondary antagonist played by Michael French, who was revealed to be an alternate version of the Doctor in Revelation. The Doctor would encounter evil versions of his companions, Sierra and Jean-Marie, who would both be part of the fascist brigade and would still be played by Claire King and Julia Ormond, respectively. The good version of the Master, called the Attendant, would be played by Robert Lindsay, who is part of a resistance group bent on taking down the fascist regime. So the A plot would be the Doctor trying to get home and avoiding the bounty hunter, while the B plot would be following the resistance group, and they would eventually intersect with the Doctor eventually helping them. This would result in a promising revolution, and the Doctor figuring out that the bounty hunter was sent by the leader himself, who knew that he needed to kill the good version of the Doctor after the reports of his meddling in the 1970s. The Attendant eventually destroys the bounty hunter, while he, the Doctor, and the leader meet face to face. Through this interaction, the Attendant is shot and starts to regenerate, while the Doctor holds the leader off long enough so that he can regenerate. The Doctor eventually beats him into submission. The new Attendant, played by an unknown actor, offers his TARDIS to get the Doctor back home, and he accepts. It is somewhat of a tearful goodbye, as both wish they could return their version of their adversary to the good side and be friends once again. The Doctor departs and lands back in his universe. He is greeted by Charlie and Benny outside of his TARDIS, who didn't even notice he was gone. He sets coordinates back to the alternate universe, and the Attendant's TARDIS dematerializes. The TARDIS crew then go back into his TARDIS, and they dematerialize. The story would have been loved by fans, with the world building, the chemistry between the Doctor and the attendant, and various aspects of the story being very much praised, as well as being a good anniversary story. The third story is Death Reaching, written by Justin Richards. Out of the corner of her eye, Charlie keeps seeing something she is sure is the Grim Reaper coming for her. She is destined to die after the Doctor saved her, yet the Doctor doesn't believe her. She's scared and he's coming ever closer. Due to the fact that Bernice had gotten the short end of the stick as a companion, this was designed to be a bait and switch story. It would start out as a Charlie story, but after the first episode, it would become a Bernice story. The first episode would involve a regular adventure, but Charlie is constantly seeing someone out of the corner of her eye. It's an all-white figure, and despite looking welcoming from what little we see of it, it fills Charlie with a sense of unease. The adventure continues, but Charlie keeps thinking about the figure and sees it from time to time. The Doctor notices this and asks Charlie about it. She tells him her theory that she thinks it's death because of how she was destined to die on the R101. The Doctor doesn't believe her, but still consoles her anyway and tries to be wary of the figure. When Charlie points it out several times, the Doctor doesn't see it. He gives his own various theories, but Charlie is adamant. He comes closer and closer throughout the episode, and then in the cliffhanger, it reaches Charlie, but then goes through her and touches Bernice's head instead, and she screams. The next two episodes would be from Bernice's point of view. She wakes up in the TARDIS, and she is in an almost infantile state. She is unaware of what happened to her. All she does know is that she is destined to die soon, but is unaware of how, when, or why. Almost like she got so much information, it almost burnt out her brain. The Doctor hooks her up to the telepathic circuits to read her mind, and on the scanner there are only slight flashes of something, and the Doctor looks worried. Bernice tries to get him to tell her what happened, but he doesn't know for sure. The rest of the episode involves the Doctor trying to help Bernice, with Charlie trying to contact the mysterious figure. The third episode would involve Bernice becoming herself once again, albeit still somewhat scared, with Charlie finding the figure once again. She tries to talk to it, but it's not all there. She gets the Doctor's help with help from the TARDIS, and it's revealed that the figure is in fact a future version of the Doctor, who is trying to warn the crew of Bernice's impending doom. The two Doctors become one, with the Doctor being aware of the other's future knowledge. He tells Charlie to not tell Bernice, and the two come back to the main console room to tell her that it was all because of the TARDIS, due to Charlie being a loose cannon in terms of time. Bernice is still uneasy, but they still continue off to their next adventure. The story would have been massively praised, and glad that Bernice got the spotlight and had a good twist in regards to who the focal point would be, as well as dealing with the repercussions of saving Charlie, developing Bernice's character, and both of them confronting the idea of death. However, some felt that the twist in regards to the figure being the Doctor was a bit of a cop-out. The fourth story is Just War, written by Lance Parkin. March 1941, Britain's darkest hour. The Nazis occupy British soil, and British citizens are being deported to European concentration camps. 6,000 people a month are dying in air raids in London. The United States show no sign of entering the war. According to the Doctor, this isn't a parallel universe. It isn't an alternate timeline, and everything is running according to schedule. But now, something somewhere has gone wrong. The Nazis are building a secret weapon, one that will have a decisive effect on the outcome of the war. The Doctor thinks it's a UFO, while Bernice thinks that the Luftwaffe have developed the largest bomber ever built. Only Charlie may have seen the mysterious craft, but she's disappeared off the face of the earth. This would have adapted the novel with some tweaks and cutting things for time. The story would have been massively praised and possibly considered the Ninth Doctor's greatest story. Many thought it was intriguing that the story humanized the Nazis in a non-insulting way, as well as having some great action and tension to the overall story. The fifth story is Valley of Shadows, written by Mark Platt. While visiting an excavation in Egypt, Bernice is seemingly crushed to death. To save her, the Doctor embarks on a journey to the Egyptian underworld. He finds himself in ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh Akhenaten rules with the aid of an alien power. This was originally a story written by Philip Martin in 1984, but it was never pursued. The in-the-universe reason as to why it was brought back was because Platt felt it made sense with Benny's character, as she was an archaeologist. So he essentially rewrote the story, only keeping the main concept and thrust of the story. It would be called a historical epic, intertwining genres of fantasy, action, and sci-fi rolled into one. Obviously, the story would start with the Doctor, Charlie, and Bernice going to Egypt, and while exploring, Bernice gets seemingly crushed. It would then split off into two different stories. The story with the Doctor and Charlie, and Bernice getting stuck in what is allegedly the underworld. The story with the Doctor and Charlie would involve going back in time to the time of Akhenaten, due to what the Doctor thinks is a clue from himself. He thinks that going back in time would would help them find out what happened to Bernice and thinks that possibly what the ancient Egyptians perceived as gods could help them on their quest to the Egyptian underworld. The first episode would mostly be the Doctor and Charlie story and Bernice being guided to the underworld by a being with a canine head, who she calls Anubis. The cliffhanger of the story would have the Doctor and Charlie seeing that Akhenaten is communicating with aliens and using their artifacts to help him rule Egypt with an iron fist, and then Bernice meeting an alien being who looks like almost like a typical green Martian, who she dubs Osiris. The second episode would involve the Doctor and Charlie trying to find out who the Pharaoh is communicating with while also trying to stop him from using this power. And Bernice tries to get back to the Doctor and Charlie and bargains with the being, who eventually reveals his name as Eknik. It's soon revealed that Eknik is of an alien species called Attenanites and that she is on an alien planet, not in the underworld, and that Bernice was saved by Eknik at the last second as he saw that she was not destined to die yet. The Doctor and Charlie eventually confront the Pharaoh to try and get him to stop using the power by claiming that Egypt is not ready for monotheism, but he soon transports them to the perceived underworld. They eventually find Bernice and Eknik. He gives them a way to destroy Akhenaten's power, which the Attenanites used as a test for humanity to see if they are deserving of contact, which they are not due to the Pharaoh's abuse of the power. They eventually trek back to Earth through the rest of the second episode and into the third episode. The Doctor eventually manages to stop Akhenaten and destroys the artifacts with help from the technology given to him by Eknik, and with it, his communication to the Attenanites is lost forever. The Doctor, Bernice, and Charlie then leave in the TARDIS. As they dematerialize, Charlie asks what happens to the Pharaoh, and the Doctor claims he doesn't know, as many of the records of Akhenaten's reign are lost to history, as well as his death. The story would have been massively praised, and many thought the melding of its many genres was done exceptionally well. Equal praise to the performances of McGann, Fisher, and Bowerman, as well as the overall story, twist, and setting. The sixth story is The Chimes of Midnight, written by Robert Shearman. But something must be stirring, something hidden in the shadows, something which kills the servants of an old Edwardian mansion in the most brutal and macabre manner possible, exactly on the chiming of the hour, every hour, as the grandfather clock ticks on towards midnight. Trapped and afraid, the Doctor and Charlie are forced to play detective to murders with no motive where the victims don't stay dead. Time is running out, and time itself might well be the killer. This would again adapt as much as it can. Bernice would be out of commission for most of it due to the events of the last story, and as well as death reaching her, kind of dealing with her death, and try to, have the in-universe reason as to why only Charlie is a companion, essentially. However, to give her some leeway, a little bit later on in the story, she would get a small subplot with the barely functioning TARDIS. The story would have been massively praised and considered one of the best of the season, and also considered one of Nine's best. While many felt that Bernice didn't get time to shine, many thought that the story more than made up for it with its great mystery, engaging cliffhangers, and character development for Charlie. Season 35 would have been considered a massive improvement over the previous season and considered the best Ninth Doctor season thus far. I would also like to remind people that due to Doctor Who celebrating its 35th anniversary, 2 spin-offs would be premiering in 1998. However, in terms of Doctor Who, not much else would change, as everyone would be staying on for another season. So that is it for seasons 34 and 35 for Doctor Who. Next month we will be taking a look at Doctor Who's first real spin-offs.